week ago, a month ago, we're getting into the, holiday season. There's a lot of people who sometimes find solace on, ranting and venting on social media, looking for a place to get, some closure. What services are available for people that have been affected when it comes to gender-based violence? And how is it accessible to them? It may sound out of reach. It may sound like, something in the pipeline. Eventually we'll get it done. What are the services available for everyone who's listening in?
Thank you so much. So a couple of services are available for anyone who's gone through any form of violation. This includes a place where you can call the 1195 hotline. It's free. You can call it anytime, day or night, and you'll get the requisite services that
115.
1195, sorry.
Okay, yeah.
1195,
Yes.
1195.
Yes.
Please, you can call that. You can share that number with anyone who is in distress or someone who has undergone any form of violation.
Yeah.
They can call that number and they'll get all the requisite services that they require. The other services that are available, and let me also just speak to something that's happening today.
Yes.
Today we are launching an integrated services at Mbagathi Hospital, which will be followed by a procession walk just to mark the day, but also to look at the milestones. And this is because the Ministry of Health has raised concern in what they are referring to as the triple threat. This is an increase in cases of teenage pregnancies, new HIV infections, and sexual and gender-based violence. If you look at the counties where the rates of new HIV infections are high, then also the cases of gender-based violence are equally high, and also teenage pregnancies. And these are our young women who are in schools, and then and most of these teenage pregnancies as a result of gender-based violence, sexual exploitation in school, and everywhere else, even at home. And these cases, as you know, really went high during the COVID period, and even now. So the reason why I'm saying this is that we have health facilities that also offer GBV services free of charge. Actually, most of the government facilities offer all services. If you need any medical care that pertain to sexual and gender-based violence, it's free in most facilities. I'm not saying all, but most facilities do offer these services. So please go into any health facility that's run by the government, a public facility, and they'll offer those services. We also have gender desks in police stations, which are also very crucial.
Very controversial as well.
Yes.
We've had a lot of people very hesitant, to go to the police stations. We must address that.
Absolutely. And I know where their concern is coming from. It's because of what the face of the National Police Service, how it has been. And also we've had, unfortunately, instances where police services have also been the perpetrators. So it's a genuine concern for most people. But the gender desk that we have, we've really worked and engaged with the National Police Service. To be honest, there's been a huge shift, and we have to acknowledge that. And we've trained numerous of them, built their capacity. How do you serve a survivor who comes there? We've also gotten feedback where most women will go there and they'll be asked questions like seriously, Natora, what were you doing at this hour?
Yeah, why were you dressed like that?
Why are you dressed like
right?
that? Yeah. So we've tried, and addressing sexual and gender-based violence, it's a social change. It will take time, but slowly by slowly we are getting there, and that's why we have to continue having these conversations and engaging with everyone who is in one way or another an actor in the access to justice chain. Yes.
And Kenya's doing a great thing. They've started in Mombasa the gender-based violence court, which are specifically, very specifically designed to not re-victimize victims, which happens all the time.
To traumatize them further.
Exactly, and it deters people from coming forward. And there's specialized integrated courts that really help and not re-victimize.
But just on the police, I think it's worth also recognizing the, like you said, the positive shift just in the recently concluded elections. We saw the police working very closely to support women candidates, to prevent violence against women in elections, providing a safe and conducive environment, whether it was for the voters or for the candidates. And I think that was very commendable of the police. And we had very low cases, actually none, on gender-based violence or violence, directed to women in politics, where in previous years and elections, So I think, the partnership with the police, I think the shift in addressing these issues is commendable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. You give credit where it's due. We look at the areas we can work on and make it more than just 16 days. We want to move it more than the hashtag. There's a lot of buzz on social media right now. What are some of the next steps for civil society when it comes to the government and the development partners. I'm going to bounce this over to all of you. Because you are in collaboration coming from different spaces. What are the big asks in these areas?
I think it takes resource. Like, you have political will, but it also takes resources, right? And I think that's a big recognition that gender-based violence won't go away with just us saying it needs to stop. You need to put in the resources. And I think that's beginning to happen. And it comes when you have this sort of trifecta of the groups involved, including the survivors, the women's rights organizations, the government at all levels, development partners, civil society coming together and making this decision and saying, what is important for us? It needs to happen together. And you need to resource it. And that's where, you know, we come in and help, you know, fund various elements. Even the coming together of these parties is often difficult, right? And also often needs to be resourced. Today there's a National Women's Conference. And so that's one of the things that we're funding, to bring people together to have these conversations, because it's important. And I think we've just always assumed, oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. It'll happen. We've said stop. No. We need to do things like have specialized courts. And we need to have training for police. And we need to have training for men and women and girls and boys at an early age. That costs resources.
And I like that everyone is involved. Again, we have to push aggressively because we are nowhere close to making sure that people understand this. There are people who actually are removed from this. We find a lot of stigma and discrimination for the victims. The spouses sometimes are in the heat of it as well. So I like that it's also in your national news, page 12, and it's also highlighting this. Would you like to add something on that?
I think engaging with stakeholders, like Janine said, is very important, but also having programs and interventions that are informed by the citizens is very important. To have, you know, durable solutions to some of these challenges that we're facing. So working very closely with our stakeholders on the ground, with the survivors themselves. So survivor-driven programs and interventions and services, but also providing space for civil society and women's rights organizations and platforms for them to engage and have these conversations openly, and can have candid conversations in terms of what is working and what is not, and building on those lessons, I think. And just making this issue everybody's responsibility. I mean, not making it one department or one institution's issue, but it's everybody, you know, whether you're in school, you know, whether you're a tattoo driver, whether you are, you know, a doctor, a teacher, it's everybody's responsibility.
Even us sitting right here.
Citizens right here.
I like that. What about you? What's your take on that?
I totally agree with what they are saying. And for civil society organization, at the moment, more than ever, we cannot afford to sit back and say that we've gotten to these milestones. There's been a lot of pushback and rollback. And if I can just mention one is currently the Sexual Offences Act, which is a very substantive act in addressing cases of sexual and gender-based violence. There's a recent judgment whereby the High Court rendered that the minimum sentences that are provided in the Sexual Offences Act are unconstitutional. The reason why the drafters of the Sexual Offences Act had those in place is to ensure that there is uniformity in terms of how perpetrators are sentenced and convicted. So taking away those minimum sentences means that any magistrate or a High Court judge can give whatever sentence to perpetrators. At times, some of them get very lenient sentences, and that does not act to serve the purposes of deterrence factor. So that's, for us, is a rollback, and that's something we are currently advocating to ensure that luckily the Director of Public Prosecution appealed that decision, and we hope that that decision will be quashed. Where we are at society, we need those minimum sentences as they are provided in the Sexual Offences Act. So for us, our work is still cut out in ensuring that anyone who violates, any perpetrator is held to account as per the laws and the regulations of the country. So there's a lot of advocacy work for us currently, also seeking support. One of the biggest gap in addressing gender-based violence, and this is something that survivors over and over have spoken about, is the lack of safe spaces and shelters in this country. I know we sound like a broken record.
Radio,
yes, but
we have to keep it.
We have to keep until we get there where survivors can access these services to ensure that they access justice, then we have to keep on pushing for this. And our government is in a position to offer this, because this is something that the government should put in place to ensure that we have them, and to ensure that if a survivor is going through the trial process, they are in a safe place. You cannot be the person who is abusing a person, and when they go to court, then they come back home to you. That's not going to work. You cannot also be in the same vicinity with them. They're going to interfere with the witnesses. They're going to interfere with that testimony. So as we champion and for activism and solidarity in eradicating violence against women and girls, we are also calling on the government to ensure that we have safe spaces and shelters. And we'll continue communicating with them to ensure that this is in policy, so that we can realize this, because policy and laws are very critical to ensure commitment from the government.
And it's not just about access to justice, that's a larger part of it, but it's also about financial independence, psychological support. There's a whole range of services that women who are often the victims require, right? In order to not go back to their abuser, they need to be financially independent. That can be very difficult.
Absolutely.
Especially if you have dependents and children. You know, if your children are psychologically upset about what has happened, they need services themselves as well. They need to go to school. They need to be clothed. How is she going to do that?
Absolutely. And it gets to affect the children as well. I mean, it's just...
and the society at large.
It's a rabbit hole. And I like that in today's Daily Nation, it says that few safe houses run by the government are under-resourced. And there's a high demand for help. And it's not just, you know,